This tutorial is for a beanie hat that has one PCB LED. This is an ideal starter project as it's very quick and easy to make. The circuit's created on a backing fabric which is then attached to the inside of the hat, and the bright LED then shines through the fabric. You'll find that it will shine through even quite dark coloured materials. All you need to do is just make sure that you've got a loose knit fabric that you're using with your hat. So the hat looks like a normal hat. So here is a hat that has the circuit inside. So you can see that we can't see anything, so it looks no different to a normal hat until we switch the LED on. So it's very easy accessible just on the inside. So if I just flick the switch up, and there's the LED shining through. If you want to, this hat has got this stitched in place permanently, but if you wanted to be able to wash the hat, all you would need to do is attach poppers just on the inside of the fabric and onto the hat, and then the circuit will be removable so that you can actually wash it. These are the materials and components we will need to make the beanie hat. So first of all, a beanie hat or something similar. In particular, what you'll need to make sure you've got is a hat that's got a double layer, so a lining layer and an outer layer. This is because we're going to stitch the circuit to the inside layer. We don't want to be able to see it on the outer layer. You will also need to use a hat that's knitted so that when it stretches, the holes become slightly bigger in the fabric, and that will allow the light to shine through when the LED is switched on. We're also going to need a switched cell holder, so here you can see the switch on the cell holder that will turn the LED on and off. We need a PCB LED, so this one's quite easy to use because it has no legs on it, so we don't have to twist the legs, which can be quite confusing to do. We're going to need a battery to go inside the cell holder, so we've got one there, and we're going to need some conductive thread to stitch all of this circuit together. So I've got a reel of conductive thread here, but you'll need about 40 to 50 centimetres of conductive thread. You're also going to need a large eye needle to put this thread into, so smaller needles won't work. Notice that on the both the switched cell holder and the LED, we have some quite big rings where the thread is going to be attached to, so that makes the both of those quite easy to stitch down. We're also going to need a piece of felt or something similar. I've chosen felt here because it doesn't fray, so that is going to make it a lot easier to use with my hat, and that is about 6 centimetres by 7 centimetres. And finally, we're going to need a reel of ordinary sewing thread, just something to match the colour of your hat when we stitch the felt onto the backing fabric. So these are the resources that I'm going to need to start to make my circuit. So I've got a needle, a large eye needle that I threaded with some conductive thread, and notice that at the end of my thread I've tied a knot. Often this would be considered to be bad practice within textiles because it can be quite messy on a piece of work. But in this instance, because the thread is so silky, if you're working as a beginner, it can be much easier to do this. If you are tying a knot, just make sure that you cut the thread very close to your knot because you don't want any loose fibres that are going to short your circuit out. And we're going to attach the cell holder to the felt. We're going to stitch through the hole and through the fabric using our needle and conductive thread. So we're going to start off the negative side, so bringing the needle through the hole and through the fabric, and we're going to do that about 6 to 8 times. You don't particularly need to count, doesn't matter if you're slightly out, just enough to hold the cell holder very firmly in place onto your backing fabric. Notice I'm just pulling the thread quite tight after each one. You want your cell holder to be held in place very tight, otherwise your circuit might not work. We're now going to take the thread down towards where we want the LED to be. So these are little running stitches that just go under and over, in and out the fabric. I'm going to have my LED positioned just here. So here's my LED. And I need to match the negative on my LED to the negative on the cell holder. So I need to make sure that these two are going to be lined up together. And I'm going to stitch this down in exactly the same way. So taking my needle through the hole in the LED and through the fabric. And doing that again 6 to 8 times, pulling your thread nice and tight as you're stitching. Just another tip, see the second layer of thread just there, try not to allow that to go double if you can, just because it can leave you with loose strands of thread which you don't want. So now I've done my 6 to 8 stitches nice and tight, and I'm just going to finish it off. We don't want to just cut it because that could leave us with some loose threads. So just going to go into the side of the stitches in the fabric just a couple of times, just to sort of do a little knot, and cut very close to the bottom of your stitches. So we're now going to work on the second side of the circuit. So we're going to go from the positive this time round to the positive on the LED. So I'm just going to turn the fabric round just to make it slightly easier for me to hold it. I'm going to do the same as before. I'm going to take the needle through the hole in the cell holder and into the fabric, and just do some oversewing stitches about 6 to 8 times, pulling nice and tight on your thread after each stitch just to make sure it's held down firmly, and then doing some running stitches to go from the cell holder to the second side on the LED, and again going through the hole in the LED into the back of your fabric, and as before, pulling nice and tight to make sure the stitches are held in place really firmly. And just like before, just doing a couple of stitches just into the side, just to sort of be quite sure to firmly hold everything in place at the end. And then we can cut the thread, and just as before, cutting very close to the stitches. So now we have our finished circuit, and we're going to put the cell into the cell holder, and we're going to put it with the positive that's on the top of the cell sliding into the cell holder itself. So it's by pushing it in nice and firmly, and then switch the switch on the side of the cell holder in order to switch the LED on and off. So we've now completed the circuit that's going to go inside the hat. So all we need to do now is stitch this circuit onto the inside lining layer of the hat. So you decide whereabouts on the hat you want your LED to sit. So just play around with just positioning where the LED is going to shine through the material. And once you've made that decision and decided, you can just put a couple of pins just in the side, just to temporarily hold the circuit in position. What you do need to be able to make sure you can do is that you can access the switch on the battery holder so that we can switch it on and off when we want to. And we could stitch all the way around, we could stitch each corner, you could even put a popper on the inside of the fabric and a popper onto the hat itself so that the whole thing can be taken off for washing. The most basic way of holding the fabric onto the hat is just to do a couple of oversewn stitches, so very, very similar to what you were doing before on the cell holder. I'm not going to knot in here, I'm just going over the same spot several times, and because the thread is not silky, it's much easier to do than it is with a conductive thread. So oversewing is just stitching in the same spot, or we can go along here if we wanted to, just catching a little bit of the hat fabric and a little bit of the felt fabric. Again, doing like before, sort of about 8 stitches just to hold that in position. Just note that we're only going through this backing layer, we're not going through the right side of the fabric. So if I just take that pin out, you can see it pulls away, we can't see the stitches on the right side of the material. And again, just to finish, just go under the stitches just a couple of times, just to keep the final stitch secured in place. So do the same for the other side, just taking the thread through the layer on the hat, again just being careful to make sure you're only going through the lining, you're not going through the right side of the material, and taking it into the piece of felt. Just take my pin out there, it's getting my way a little bit. Again, same thing, 6 to 8 stitches, and then just going into the side of the stitches just to do a little couple of finishing stitches. Just cut that. As I've said, you don't have to have these loose like these are here. You can do stitches that go quite a way down the side of the felt just to hold it in place. But just remember just to make sure that you leave space that you can get your finger in to be able to switch the LED on and off.